Good morning, it's Leah. Hi. So I wanted to just explore the 3-4D level existence and how we're connecting into the higher realms of fifth dimension and beyond a little bit further. How that's showing up for me, the tangible experiences um, in that awakening process, in that transition process. What my level of commitment is like and trust in my own process of ascension as well. So, first of all, I want us to start out with a lot of the times when people use D, they're talking about dimension, and dimension is a consciousness experience. So, the level of consciousness is directly attributed to the ability to be open in accessing the immediate both cerebral function, but also the unity connection. So the connection with everyone, everything, the process of the fact that it is all holographic and all one and the same. Sometimes people interchange D with density, and density is actually more about our earth physical experience. It's about matter. So to explain that, the first density is the elements earth, fire, air, water, metal, or ether, AETHER. It's about minerals. The second is photonic density. So light is information that informs the biological level. So microbes turn to plants, turn to animals, turn to conscious humans. It's where the group consciousness and complementary thinking takes place. So the photons, although density is the second density, they actually inform the first density materials to turn into life form. So it's a wave before the DNA. Then you've got the third density, and that's actually form. That's the living universe, human, planet, sun, universe with bioenergetic consciousness. The fourth density is perception of others as part of self. So it's where we can access the collective consciousness. It's the perception of light body. And that's also where we get harmony through group consensus, because all is available to us for us to be able to shift into a new perception of awareness. Fifth density is wisdom and instant manifestation. So it's also called transcendental intention. It's about the ability to hold the intent of something in order for that to actually experience in density form. The sixth is the experience of the self as light. The seventh is the creator who knows itself and compacts itself into completeness. And the eighth is returning into infinity. And then what actually happens, because it's holographic, is that the eighth density is also the first octave of the set that's above. So there's like a higher, that's then getting into the higher planes of existence. So having said all that about density is to do with atomic structure. And that's also where the sacred geometry shapes exist. But I wanted to share on dimension. So dimension being the consciousness experience. So let's just jump in and start with the third dimension. When we're talking about, say if we're talking about math, then the third dimension as a shape is actually the depth, the width, and the length, right? So that's what we're experiencing in terms of consciousness. In the third dimension, which is the dimension that we function in on a daily basis as humans, we're experiencing consciousness experiences of depth, width, and length. So it creates a particular point of perception, right, in depth, width, and length, which is why time and gravity, they both impact onto this experience, and it's that moment-to-moment reality. Fourth dimension is the third dimension plus each current pursuant path. So from the perspective where you're standing now, you create a trajectory, and that trajectory then is projected across that fourth dimension consciousness experience, right? So what you actually have available to you in the fourth dimension is the full spectrum of consciousness. So if we break it down and just make it quite simple, and we say the full spectrum of human consciousness is actually can be summed up in 12 archetypes. So whether you're talking Jung archetypes or whether you're talking religion has archetypes, whether you're talking fairy tales, whether you're talking ancient civilization archetypes, gods, goddesses, that sort of function. But each of those archetypes is available to us in that as a full spectrum of human consciousness in the fourth dimension, right? And then within those 12 is another 12, because again, remembering that it's holographic. So we're stepping down into that next point of access. So that's basically the level where psychic is interpreted from. So psychic actually being a particular language, right? It's a language form because it's about interpretation of residual energies from the third dimension and into the fourth dimension. And then we're talking about, okay, well, the fifth dimension, right? So the fifth dimension is every possible timeline from the third dimension. So, and all possible realities related to them. So the way I like to explain this is, in this current moment, you may, let's just say you have these as possibilities. In the fifth dimension, you have those as possibilities from these possibilities. So it branches out, and in the fifth dimension, all of those complete possibilities are available to you. So the key way that I prefer to connect into the fifth dimension of consciousness is actually to tune into my highest possible vibration in any particular moment, especially if things are difficult. Asking for assistance to be able to have the highest potential possibility revealed, and for my own vibration to align to it. So remembering how I was talking about the fourth dimension consciousness with all the archetypes, within those archetypes then there's the higher vibration elements that you can tune into, because remembering that they're holographic, so they're fractal. So you go into it once and then you can go into it infinite times. So that's what we're doing in the fifth dimension. It's like standing, if you've ever been in an elevator that has mirrors on both sides, and you look to the left and you see yourself repeated into infinity in the mirrors, or you look to the right and the same thing, right? Looking left is a particular perspective. Looking right is a particular perspective. Waiting for the doors to open in front of you is a particular perspective. But the point of it basically is that for us to continually recalibrate, that's what we're doing with our vibration on a daily basis. When we have the lower digit thoughts, so fear, grief, sadness, resentment, regret, those sorts of feelings and thoughts. And then we've got the higher thoughts and feelings. So love, freedom, happiness, peace, joy. And on a daily basis, then that's affecting our calibrated vibration. So working into and connecting into those higher realms of the fifth dimension and beyond, it's actually choosing the highest point in those possibilities out of all those possibilities that present themselves. And sometimes some of them aren't necessarily fully available to us because the vibration of what they are means that we need to be growing as an individual into that vibration and expanding and amplifying into that vibration by holding more of those higher digit emotions and feelings and processing more of the lower emotions and feelings in order to liberate them, so that then our mean vibration, our everyday natural vibration, starts to lift to a higher frequency as its standard set point. And once that begins to happen, then those higher potential possibilities become available to us easier and faster. And they start to come into our life with greater ease, and when we can approach them with a sense of allowing and acceptance, then they can actually transpire into the highest potential reality that is possible for us as the soul incarnated as the character. And in my case, the character Leah, right? So the consciousness experience beyond the fifth dimension then starts to get into sixth dimension. So, for the fifth dimension, I just want to say that's where I will channel a lot of information through, because the highest potentiality is available as a possibility, right? So when I will channel collectively, that's quite often where I'll channel from. Although the fourth dimension is consciousness as a realm, is great to understand what the key challenges are, particularly for the collective of humanity. And in some cases, when I channel for like disease, dis-ease, or bacteria, disharmony, they're all set collectives in themselves. So that will quite often come from the fourth dimension and sometimes from the fifth dimension, right? Because depending on the message that they want to be relaying, if they're talking about their problems and their challenges, then it's generally from the fourth dimension. If they're talking about their growth and potentiality, then it's from the fifth dimension, because it's the vibration, right? So the fourth dimension runs on a specific frequency band, and the fifth dimension runs on a specific frequency band. So as we lift our own natural vibrational state, they become easier and easier to tap into. The sixth dimension then is no time space limitations. So where we had the depth, width, and length before in the third dimension, there is no limitations in the sixth dimension. So instantaneous experience from the originating possibility point and the change that you made. So it kind of tracks back to be instantaneous. The seventh dimension is a single point where all possibilities converge in the universe, right? So rather than there being this identified separation or identified disseminatable experiences, in the seventh dimension they converge all to one point, and that's for all things, anything that has access to consciousness. So plants, animals, Gaia as the light body for Earth, humans, what some people would call extraterrestrial. They're all consciousness that merges as source, as the unity of source, creating individualized experiences of itself to experience itself. The eighth dimension then is when we start to get into other universes, so multiverses, which is like starting to be the convergence of timelines. And that's infinity of possibility in this universe relating to another universe. So it actually, that's where the people talk about wormholes. They talk about like being able to jump through dimensions. The ninth dimension, instant access to experience any timeline of any possibility from any universe. And that's really, a lot of astral travel is probably done in the ninth, but it's actually a higher state of consciousness that's required than astral travel. So that's where you start to invoke the monadic body and start to use that body as the vehicle, which is like layered out in the highest frequency state surrounding the physical body. And then the 10th is all possibilities of all universe as referred to in the 9th and treated as a single point, right? So again, you've got that multi-convergence across the multiverse coming to that point in the universe for source experiencing itself as the individuated experience, but coming across multi-dimensions to come to that point. And then beyond the 10th dimension, so 11 and above, it's experienced as the 0 point. Some people might call this source field. It's non-contextual. So it's not actually able to be contextualized into something that the human mind can comprehend in terms of a logical context. Non-contextual experienced as the totality of source, right? So it is everything. Collective consciousness, but not the expression of consciousness. So the expression of consciousness comes through all those other dimensions, whereas the 0 point or the source field, the originating point, is actually just the pulsation of source and its intention as light form. So it will send out the vibration and frequency. So remember before when I was talking about density, it's the photonic instruction. It's the intention of the unified source field that happens before the photons converge as form. So it's the light wave, it's the instructing light wave before the form is formed in density. So when you look at it at that point, it's bioenergetic consciousness when it starts to be self-instructing in order to create form. So coming back to the original perspective I wanted to offer today, how often am I connecting into higher realms of fifth dimension and beyond? Almost every moment of the day is the answer, because whether fully conscious to it or operating in the subconscious mind, it's certainly a part of my experience, and the tangible experiences that show up for this, that's where understanding the language of intuition starts to really assist me in being able to see what that looks like for me. And intuition shows up as a language, as a dictionary, a codex, a subset, for translation, it's for translation, whereas psychic is for interpretation, right? So this is why sometimes when I speak about intuition, I say that for some people, for people it shows up like as if you're trying to speak Chinese, right? And sometimes the dialect for Chinese might be Mandarin or it might be Cantonese. So it really depends on whether you understand Mandarin or Cantonese. And intuition will teach you the language if you learn to listen to it. It's like being submerged in a culture, right? You start hearing the language on the radio, the people around you are speaking it, you're reading it every day. Sometimes your cognitive ability to understand it might not be there, but you can pick certain words out in order to be able to translate it, and therefore you can follow the flow of what it's actually trying to have you to understand. Sometimes your reading abilities might be stronger. Sometimes your writing abilities might be stronger. Sometimes your verbal communication might be stronger. It's the same way with intuition. So the more that you surround yourself with the willingness to hear it and to understand it and to be open to accepting what it wants to be saying to you, the easier it becomes to interpret. And therefore the ability for you to start to have a two-way communication with it is actually heightened and escalated. Whereas psychic work, it still requires that interpretation. So you basically need to build a dictionary. And this is why sometimes, the people who do psychic work very well for others are easily able to interpret based on their own dictionary into words and language that the client is actually open to hearing and understanding. And therefore it connects with the resonance that the client is and the frequency the client is sitting on for them to be able to receive and hear the truth in what's being said. Whereas that's what psychic is, right? So it's a language that requires to build a capacity of understanding in order to interpret, right? It will come through as symbols, signs, terminology, but what a symbol that might be to somebody else might be completely different to me. For example, I believe John Edward uses a red rose. He's the psychic medium who appears a lot on TV. I believe that he uses the red rose as a sign, the pink, I think it's the pink rose, as a sign of love from somebody who's passed over. So residual 3D energy, density is what it was, right? Their density is passed over from the third dimension density into the fourth density, and is coming through from the fifth density, even or higher. And therefore the psychic is actually accessing that information from the fourth dimension consciousness, and reaching down into the third dimension consciousness of what that form was in the third density. So when that person was a person, human, walking around on Earth, they basically leave an energetic resonance, almost like a shadow that's an energetic field, particularly when things aren't completed, or there remains a connection with loved ones. So when the soul and the character is still connected to the soul and the character that is still here and alive and in full consciousness in the third dimension of consciousness. I hope this is making sense. I hope that you're able to follow it. If not, then sit with it and then replay it again and allow the next nugget to drop in for you. And so the psychic person, the psychic skill, the psychic language is actually just interpreting those sign symbols and evidence, or what creates a body of evidence for the client, for the people receiving the psychic interpretation. But if you can learn to cultivate your own psychic codex, your own psychic dictionary, your own psychic language interpretation ability, then translation ability, then you can actually do that, create that experience for yourself and become more connected that way as well, should you wish to. Yeah, I think that's about it. I hope that helps to explain a little bit more about it and to explain a bit about how I experience it. I guess just to round it out, what I want to say is the tangible experiences that I have are feeling as though things are aligning, even if I feel resistance to what it is, being able to come up to the highest possibility in any moment and work through it from the fifth dimension and see that the fifth dimension me actually in consciousness actually has the entire script, like knows what the journey is, knows what all the possibilities are, knows the choose your own adventure that gets you to the highest potential outcome and experience for this embodied incarnation. And the third dimension me, the character, the soul, has to be in those experiences of those moments as they roll along and as they come through to be experienced. And that way it's kind of, sometimes I get stuck in the character and get stuck in the lines of Leah is in despair, Leah is in frustration, anger, resentment, when actually the higher self, me in the fifth dimension, has the script and is just like, don't worry, it doesn't matter. It's okay. It's fine. The reason this is coming up is for you to have that feeling of that experience, and you can liberate it. You can just free it, let it go, let it move on to be whatever it would like to instruct into next. Because remember, it's always that unity source consciousness self-instructing through the bioenergetics fields of 0 point back to the bioenergetic field that's around us all the time, and access through electromagnetic frequency. And therefore that light that's coming through the electromagnetic frequency is the photonic light that's the instructing light from source. So just trusting that that script is conducting the exact experiences and the exact processes that are right for you, and the free will choice in being able to choose the perspective that you are experiencing from when you're in it is possibly, for me anyway, the greatest gift of what it is to be human, alive, living in life and experiencing all that life has to offer. I think that's it from me for right now. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and just remember, trust in you. You're your greatest teacher, mentor, guide, and all you need to do is ask, cultivate that connection with the fifth dimension of consciousness, your higher self, and just ask. Ask what the highest possibility is out of a particular scenario, and take the little steps. And it's okay to sit in the stuff, but also know that it's okay to allow it to move on through, because you've listened to it and you've experienced what it has to offer you. Okay, trust in you. Mwah. See ya.